I had just made a video showing how to make an array of circles into a mermaid scale pattern, and I mentioned that I used edit, clone, create tiled clones to make that array of circles. And this create tiled clones is actually can be pretty confusing. If you Google it, you will find all sorts of tutorials on it and information about what the different settings do. So I just thought I'd do a video playing around with it to show you some of the things it can do. I have another video where I use it to make circular tiled clones so you can easily make a mandala. So if you are interested in that, check out that video. I'll try to put a link to that in the description of this one. The first thing I'm going to do for this is I'm just going to make a little pattern to play with. So I'm going to hold down the Shift and Control. I'm on the Make a Square, Create Rectangles and Squares tool. And I'm going to hold down Shift and Control to make a perfect square. And I'm going to duplicate it, Control D. And then I'm just going to line up another square, duplicate again. I'm making basically a grid, duplicating to make a grid of squares. And then I'm going to change the colors of each of these squares. I'm just making a little pattern to play with real quickly. Okay. I'm going to select these all, and I'm going to go to, I can't remember what it's this, transform. I want to do transform. The keyboard shortcut is Shift Control M. But this opens up a transform window where you can move, scale, rotate. And I'm going to rotate these 45 degrees like that. And then I got a bunch of my snap tools on, and I'm just going to take this and draw another square using my snap tools to make it a perfect square in the middle of this diamond now. And I'm going to duplicate that 3 more times. So Control D, Control D, Control D. And then I'm going to use that to make, to subtract away. I'm going to select both that black square and first the yellow, and I'm going to go to Path Intersection, then select another of my black squares and the green square and go to Path Intersection. Same thing here, and you'll see what I'm doing once I get it done. Okay, so I've just made myself a little, almost like a quilt square to play with. And I'm going to group that, Control G. So now that's all one little tile that I can play with for all these rotate, for all of this tiled clone. Okay, so now I'm going to go to Edit, Clone, Create Tiled Clones. And this menu comes up, Create Tiled Clones. And it's got a lot of tabs, and it'll do a lot of different things. For the first experiments, we're just going to use the first option in Symmetry, which is P1 Simple Translation, and I'll show you what that will do. And then we're going to explore now the Shift tab. So you see all these settings: Shift X per row, Shift X per column, randomize, Shift Y per row, per column, and randomize. Honestly, I don't know what exponent does. And then down here, apply to tiled clones. You can tell it how many rows and how many columns you want. So for now, I'm just going to change this to 5 rows and 5 columns. And I'm going to leave everything else the way it was. And I'm just going to say create. And you can see that it created an array of my tile that I made. And it just copied each one exactly. And it put them, their bounding boxes are touching each other. Okay, so that's the simplest thing to do. If I now go to Symmetry and change it to a different type of rotation, like say P2, which is a 180-degree rotation, and tell it to create, now you can see that it's rotated each tile 180 degrees. And the first row, they're all exactly the same, and it just rotates as it does the columns. I'm going to change it back to P1 Simple Translation. And I'll show you some of the other things it'll do. I'm actually just going to undo to get it back to where it was. Okay, so now if I go back to the Shift column, and I want to tell it to Shift X a certain amount per row. Let's just try that and see. I'm going to tell it to Shift X 10% per row and say Create. And what you can see, each row, it shifts over 10% of the width of the object. Okay? if I click reset here, it changes all those back to 0. Now I'm going to shift Y per row by 10%. And you can see what that does. It shifts it down 10% in between each row. I'll undo, reset. Now let's shift X per column 10% and see what it does. All right, in that case, it shifted each row over 10% of the width. Let's undo that and reset and do shift Y 10%. I have to have it, make sure it's selected. And then you can see there it shifted each Y down per row. Okay? See what I say, this is confusing. It can get confusing. So if I wanted to make an array of these tiles and I wanted them to be spaced 10% apart, I would have to click here 10% and click here 10%. So Y per row and X per column. And you can see that it makes an array that are evenly spaced. All right? Now, if I want these to overlap somewhat, I can give this a negative number, -10, -10. And now you can see they're overlapped a bit. And that's what I did for the mermaid circles. I had them overlap. So then if I want to shift it over half of the width, I can say 50%. So in this X per row, shift 50%. And you can see that it shifts each one over through half of the width of the object. Okay? And then I think the best way to learn these things is to just sit and play with it, because there's a lot that it will do. I can also tell it, let me reset this, reset, and so this would just make, if I left it alone, again, a standard array like that, all of them touching each other. But I can tell it to randomize the shift in X. Let's say 10% for that. And now it makes a sort of a random arrangement. I can tell it to randomize Y also, like so. I can leave it like this, and I can tell it to rotate per row or per column. So if I tell it to rotate 10 degrees per row, now it rotates each row by 10 degrees. Undo that, change that back to 0, and change per column to 10 degrees. And it rotates it in a different way. I can have it rotate both of them 10 degrees. So who knows what all you could use all this stuff for. You can also have it rotate the scale. I can have it make my X or Y bigger as it goes through. So if I click on scale and tell it to scale 10% per row. Oh, I still have, let me reset it, because I still have it on rotate. And you can see it gets bigger as it goes down toward the bottom. I can have it get bigger as it goes toward the right also. You can add randomization to how big it gets. Okay. So those are just some of the things you can do with this. Let me see. Now when you make tiled clones, you will see this first one, your original, is still there, and that can cause some problems later on. If you see the clone, if I click on this and I go down and look at my info bar here, it says that's a clone. If I hold down the Alt key and click to select what's underneath, it says that is a group of 4 objects. That's my original. To do anything with this later on, I need to get rid of that original, so I can just press delete to get rid of that. And now all I have, it changes everything to what the original was, which is a group of 4 objects. So to show how I did the mermaid circles, let me just see if I can replicate that really quickly. I'll draw a circle, hold down the Shift and Control like that. I'm going to come down here and click on the X to make its fill transparent. And then what did I do? I'm trying to remember. It was a simple P1 translation, and I shifted it 50% per row. Let's just see what that gets us. Okay, so that got our X moved over, but I want it to overlap. So here, I believe I did minus 52. See what that gets us. Yeah, and then I'm going to need to shift the X over just a little bit because I want these circles to be touching each other. So let me shift the X minus 2. Okay, so there we go. And then, like I said, you have to get rid of the original. So if I click on that first circle, that's my clone. I hold down the Alt key and click again. And now it tells me that's the circle in the root, and I can delete that one. And now I can go ahead and treat these just as objects. I can do anything to them now that I normally would in Inkscape. So Create Tile Clones is a really fun thing to play with. It's got all sorts of uses, many of which I'm sure I haven't even thought of yet. But like I said, I do have that video on how to make a mandala using a rotational tile clone. And that's a lot of fun to play with as well. So play around with it and see if you can come up with something cool. Thanks for watching.